Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to the Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant podcast, where we explore the extraordinary world of organ transplantation. I'm your host, BJ Odom. Each week we share inspiring stories and introduce you to remarkable individuals sharing their own transplant stories. Be sure to support the podcast by leaving a 5-star review and subscribing on your preferred podcast platform. Have a transplant story you'd like to share or comments about the podcast? Just email us, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Don't forget to connect with us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, and check out our website too, giftoflifepodcast.com. As we welcome you to episode 63. Today we bring you a story of fierce love, quiet strength, and an unbreakable spirit. Imagine learning just before your baby is born that his heart is broken, that his life will begin with a fight. That was the reality for Kristin Worthen. Her son Theo has endured more in his young life than most of you will. 5 heart surgeries, and at 7 years old, a life-saving heart transplant. This isn't just a story about a transplant. It's about a little boy with a warrior's heart and a mother who never gave up, no matter how long the nights and how heavy the burden. Today we honor their journey, their love, their courage. Let's dive into episode 63 and meet Kristin and Theo. 2 hearts forever beating as one. Coming up next. Kristin, let us welcome you to the podcast. So excited to hear Theo's story. But before we get started, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
I was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. We live just outside of Louisville now, and I worked as an attorney for quite a long time. We'll go back to that at some point. But we've got taken some time off to care for my youngest. But yeah, I'm married, and we have 3 children. We have a 14-year-old girl. It's hard to believe. She's already 14. We've got a 12-year-old son, and then our youngest, Theo, is 7.
And how did the siblings react with him? Because, I was sickly as a kid too, and I had an older brother, but we were spread out by 8 years. So it was kind of like, he was always around and he always loved me, but, with him being older, he wasn't connected. When I was a child, I was more of an annoyance than anything else. How do your children interact with each other?
So, I mean, there are typical sibling spats, but especially between my middle child and my youngest. But my daughter is actually 7.5 years older than Theo. And so she treats him like she's mom number 2.
Okay, that's awesome.
She's, very maternal. Just that they both adore him. I think sometimes, there's maybe a teeny bit of jealousy because of the attention that he gets, but really, it's never been a big problem or anything. They just really cherish him.
And we're going to talk about Theo today because this is the gift of life, and we talk about organ recipients and organ donors, and Theo, a young recipient. How old is Theo, if I can ask?
He's 7.
7 years old. Now, how did this all begin, and where did Theo's story all start?
Oh, gosh. Theo's story began when I was still pregnant. So we, at the 20-week ultrasound, which is usually when you find out the gender, they call it the anatomy scan, we went and I could tell the ultrasound was taking a little longer than it had with my prior pregnancies, and I started to kind of worry. And sure enough, when we saw the doctor, she told us that they couldn't visualize all four chambers of the heart.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we found out that there was something wrong even before he was born.
Now, like I said, I've told you off, microphone that I also had health problems with my heart as a child. Now, I have heard, and I'm not a doctor, and like I said, I'm an old man now, so a lot of these practices they use today aren't around any longer. But I had transposition of the great arteries, and I've heard they can actually do that in the womb. Dan, do you know anything about, or what was Theo's problem? What did he need?
I didn't know they could do the TGA surgery in the womb. I did not. I know they can do some. I didn't realize that was one of them. That is
Well,
really cool.
like I said, I could be wrong, but I have been, just told by other people, oh, they can do that, in the womb now. Cause when I had my
Wow.
surgery, I was like, pushing 14 years old. And that was kind of the age they told my parents I would never live past. And all of a sudden, I guess they got a call and they go, well, we've got this new experimental surgery. It is experimental, but we think it's a good shot. And if you're willing, we're willing. And of course, hearing the words they heard that, well, his life is almost over. They said, let's go for it. And thank goodness, here we are. I'm 70 years old and I'm talking to you today.
It's amazing.
So yeah, I don't know whether they can do them in the womb or not, but I have heard that. So, but
Yeah.
so he's born and he hasn't had the surgery yet or anything, right?
Right. So he has something called heterotaxy. And so with heterotaxy, they usually characterize it by saying there's the three M's. Internal organs are either malformed, misplaced, or missing altogether. So he's got a lot of really unique things about his internal organs. The most problematic being the fact that his heart, he was essentially half a heart. He had the two atrium, but those are really small, and he was missing the ventricle that pumps blood to the whole body. So that's kind of the powerhouse of the heart. He didn't have that. Um, and then he also was not born with a spleen, which makes infections extra risky for him.
Okay. So obviously you discovered that at the ultrasound. Theo was born, and then how do things progress, and what takes place? Is it the heart transplant? Like right away, or
No, I never really thought we'd end up at heart transplant, but um, so with kids who are born with half of a heart or single ventricle, that's what they call it, they typically have a set of three surgeries. The first one is when they're newborn, the second one is a few months later, and the third one's at like 2 or 3 years old. Theo was actually able to skip that very first surgery as a newborn because of how unique and complex his anatomy was. Um, but then he did have his first open heart surgery at 3 months old. So then he went 4 years without a hospital stay.
oh, that's good then.
Other than the pandemic, and us being nervous about getting him sick, things were fairly normal. But then, when he had to have that third surgery, um, his body just did not like it, and we tried two more surgeries after that to try to preserve his native heart, but it just was not in the cards for him, and he went into heart failure. So at that point, when he was newly 6, he was listed for transplant.
Okay. So then, really, when was the third surgery? How old was he then?
He was 4.5.
Okay, so he went another few years, and then it was like they had to come in and tell you he's going to need a heart transplant.
Yeah. Um, but it was constant problems for those few years. It was a lot of hospitalizations. Um, we went to Boston for some surgeries. We were in the hospital here at home all the time. It we it, it it took a while to get there, but it was painful.
Mm-hmm. So now let me ask you this, because I've heard this, and I think I asked you this also off microphone a couple weeks ago when we first met and started talking. I've heard that the anti-rejection drugs, at least the dose is lower, or you don't need it at all, depending on how young you are. Obviously, though, he was like what, 6, 7? How old was he? 6 when he got the transplant?
He had just turned 7
Okay, so does
when he
he?
got the transplant. Yeah.
So does obviously then he still needs the anti-rejection drugs.
I'm pretty sure he'll need them for life. I think maybe with some other organs, maybe, or depending on what the transplant is, that could vary. But as far as I know, pediatric heart transplants will always need the anti-rejection meds. I
Okay.
haven't heard differently.
How did that go as you went into the office and they go, your son? Obvious. It was probably though because he was fading. Was it positive news for you then, or how did you handle that?
No, it was a rough few years because I felt like all of my worst fears just kind of kept unfolding for him, you know. But yeah, he woke up one morning and he had just gone back to school after his last open heart surgery, and his face was really puffy, and I knew something was wrong. And so we went to see the cardiologist. We actually already had an appointment scheduled that day, and they told us he was in heart failure. And it was kind of, it wasn't a shock, but it was still hard to hear. Um, you know, the heart transplant is such a blessing, but I think I don't know what it's like as an adult, but for the parent of a child, it's just terrifying. Like, my child is in heart failure. Are they going to make it until a heart becomes available for them?
Because I
So I
know,
wouldn't call it a relief.
yeah, because I know peds. Actually, I've talked to a lot of you mothers lately. I think I've got on the mother radar, and I think it's obvious, but I mean not obvious, but I think it's amazing. But as me being a sick child, it does bring back a lot of memories and a little pain here and there. But I think it's also helping me. So I'm enjoying these pediatric battles and wins to no ever end, and I just feel really connected to these kids. So I'll let you kind of continue the story, because you're presenting it. So he needs a transplant now. What's going on?
Yeah. So it took us like 3 weeks for the evaluation, even though he was inpatient. The team really wanted to be sure that there was nothing they could do with medicine to help him. And they ended up deciding he needed to be listed. After that, he had about 7 weeks at home, which that was nerve wracking because, one week we're hearing, oh, he can probably wait a year before he needs a transplant or before he has to come inpatient. Um, and that was not the case. So, anyways, he was admitted 7 weeks after he was listed. And so he had a really complicated setup, and we felt that we had to travel a little to stay at the hospital where he ultimately received his transplant. And so Theo and I lived an hour and a half away from home for a year, basically. Um, he was admitted. Uh, they did a calf, and he wasn't recovering from the calf. It was really scary, and that's when they said, "Okay, he's too sick. You all need to stay." And so, yeah, we were in the hospital for 7.5 months, and he just he has the best little personality and positive outlook. He did great. He handled it really well. And thankfully, once he got on the medicine that helped support his heart through that stay, he really didn't decline rapidly. I mean, he waited really well. We were really blessed and really thankful for that. But still, 7.5 months is a long time. So after 7.5 months, we got the call, and about a month after transplant, he was discharged.
Cool. And how is he doing today?
He's doing great. It's
That's
so
what I like
hard.
to hear.
It's so hard after everything that we've been through to not be waiting for the other shoe to drop still, I think, as his mom. But so sometimes it's hard for me to even say that. But yes, he is doing really well. He's happy. He doesn't get winded really easily. When he's running around and playing, he doesn't have to stop and take as many breaks when he's being active. Um, Everything has been really good so far. It's amazing.
Now, let's go back to being in the hospital there, because you said, it's kind of like me. I was in the hospital a lot, and my mother had to be about a little over an hour. Well, it wasn't as bad as you, but like a little over an hour away from Chicago, because that's where I had all of my major work done back when I was a youngster. But, you have other children at home. You have a life. You have a job. Obviously with 3 children, you're using 2 incomes to support the family. How did all that go for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty challenging, but we made it work. I was not able to work. It's scary. It's scary to think he needs a heart transplant, and am I going to spend the last few months of his life working, trying to balance work and caring for him. And so thankfully I was able to take a leave of absence from work and be there with him. And of course that presents financial challenges, but it was just the right decision for our family at the time. um, and I missed my big kids like crazy, and
Yeah,
it
I
was
would
really
imagine.
hard. um, they're my husband was wonderful to them, and he took the best care of them here at home. And he was on the road constantly.
Oh, wow.
They came up and stayed with us pretty much every single weekend, sometimes for a visit in the middle of the week. They When he was first listed, it was the beginning of summer, or when he was first admitted, sorry, it was the beginning of summer. And so they spent pretty much the whole summer up there at the Ronald McDonald House next door. They spent Christmas break with us, spring break, it just as often as possible, we were all together.
Well, that's cool. And I mean, it's not only did Theo need it, but it's something that you needed yourself also.
Yes, Theo was always thrilled when his family walked through the door. I mean, I was too, of course, but it was really good to see how happy everybody was to see each other. Sad too, but um, I'm just really thankful that we were able to prioritize having us together as often as possible.
Because you did mention in the very beginning when you said you were an attorney, you were going to talk more on that. Did we miss a step
Oh,
or
no, I said I have been off, but I'll probably go back. I'll go back to work at some point. Not probably, I will. Um,
because in
I
my
miss
mind, I
it.
went somewhere evil. I go, okay, so there was something that happened and she needs her lawyering degree to get them through. But I'm glad that's not the case. And that's not where you need to
Oh
go.
no,
So
no,
yeah,
not at
everything was
all.
excellent. I mean, besides Theo being sick and you being worried, you and Theo were treated amazingly at the hospital and through doctors.
Yes, yes. The nurses were family to us. We still miss them. The team was brilliant, great. We have zero complaints. For having to be in the hospital for such a long time. It was as positive of an experience as it could have been.
Well, as I've told every mother that I've had on the show so far, because again, being a sickly kid, Theo was leading a normal life. It wasn't the normal life that all the other kids are associated with, but I remember those days, and it was like Yeah, I wasn't running as fast as the rest of the kids. I wasn't doing this, but it was my normal. And, and then I got, the operation when I was older and, I felt better. I played a little high school basketball, although I didn't learn to run or anything because, you didn't experience that as a child. I wasn't running. So, the other kids were so far ahead of me, but, I still played basketball. I was the bench guy, but to me, that was even great. So I know he will, thrive. And I've heard people now getting heart transplants and running marathons and, doing everything. Plus, he was younger too. 'Cause like you said, he's 7. I wasn't until I was 13 or 14 that I got, my extra boost. So amazing, amazing story. Anything that we're missing that maybe we should discuss about you and Theo or the whole experience?
I think I just can't talk about this without saying how thankful we are for our donor family. I just can't fathom how difficult it was for them to be in. I mean, honestly, like my nightmare situation, right? Like I've spent Theo's entire life worried, am I going to lose him? And for another family to be put into that position with their child, and choose to help somebody else is just the most amazing thing I think anybody could ever do. Like, like your podcast is called It's the Gift of Life. There's no better gift than that. Um, so, I've heard that fewer people have been saying yes to to transplant, to donating organs, kind of more recently. And I just think it's important to share how big of an impact that makes for families and just how grateful that we are when people make that hard decision.
Now, why would, because I haven't heard that. And like I said, I haven't really worked with, too many pediatric patients. So this is somewhat new to me with transplants. Why do you think the numbers are lower? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, when you have a young child and you have to make that decision, I can see how rough that would be. And someone who is not like you and me and, close to the world of transplants don't understand it on a deep level as, the average parent would. So why do you think that there's a decline and what would you tell those parents?
I don't know. I think you could only guess as to why that is. And I really don't know what it is. I've heard it a few times from different doctors that there's seeing, um, I don't know how to word it, but it's just fewer people are saying yes to organ donation in recent days, months, whatever. But you know, it's kind of cliche, but it doesn't do you any good to take those organs with you, but it could save another life. And kind of my dream is one day we get to meet the donor's family and they can hear their child's, heart beating in Theo's chest and know that a part of their child lives on, and that that's just, if you're put in that situation, that to me seems like that could be somewhat healing.
Now,
That could be really nice.
now someone I had on the podcast needed a liver transplant and he received it. And to me, this is like a sad story, but yet an amazing story at the same time. And he shared it with me, which I thought that was a pretty brave thing for this man to do. But he was a grown adult and he had a wife. 2 years before he needed a transplant or knew anything at all about a transplant, his wife passed. And he was one of those people in the room that had the conversation. Would you like to donate your wife's organs? And he was a firm, no way. No way am I going to do this. And now that he has lived through it and experienced the gift of life, he regrets. And he said, if I could go back to that day, I would 100% have changed my mind and done what I think even my wife would have approved of, for sure. And I just wish that we could get that out to everyone. I think a lot of people, until you experience or till a transplant is around you, it's the furthest thing from your mind. So when you're grieving and someone says, can we, have the organ so others can live? You're just, no, get out of here. And I wish, like with, hopefully people hear your story and hopefully hear his story and they can say, it is so important.
Yeah, it really is. It's an incredible thing that organ donation is an option for us, right? And so, yeah, I think the more people, obviously, that can be willing to say yes, the better, the more lives that can be saved.
And that's why I think, I know there's a lot of people that either have had transplants or are waiting for a transplant that listens to the podcast. But my hope is the healthy person that's, running around the block and playing sports and, living life to the fullest, get a chance now and again to hear the podcast and hear the impact that this can make if they ever have to make that decision. And, nobody
Yeah.
wishes that on anyone, but
Right.
it's something that just, it does happen in life. And it's good to be prepared for that in life and to know what your answer is going to be. And of course, especially if you're older, discuss it with your family and things like that. Now, a few weeks ago, I had a mother on and I don't know, but her daughter was like Theo, pretty young child. And she knew she was having problems and she knew that, she could leave any day and have to say goodbye to her mother and her family. Did Theo, because I remember as a kid, like I said, my parents were told I would never live past 14, but I never heard that conversation. I was never told about that conversation. My brother has passed, but I talked to his wife because I was writing a book and I said, do you remember if he knew that? And she goes, because she was his high school sweetheart and, knew him forever. And she says, no, I mean, we knew you were sick, but we never knew you were, could leave us. Did your children or Theo know about this or did they have those feelings?
No, thankfully, I don't think that they did. It's something that, if they ask questions, we tried to answer them kind of as high level and kind of follow their lead. If they followed up, we would answer more, but that never really came up. And it's not, I just think it's too heavy. Some kids are really smart. They're going to figure it out. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But um, I think it's just too heavy to offer up,
Okay. Well, I really,
And I mean, there were times where we told his siblings, like, if they were, I can't remember what was going on, but just you want to make sure that you're here with him and that you're getting good time with him. That's about as specific as we got.
yeah, because you didn't want that to affect their lives either. And I think having like an older brother, I think that would have probably affected him. So I think my parents tried to shelter us both from as much as they could, but yet I remember this too, and even the name because I've done a lot of research now that I'm writing this book, and between this podcast and writing a book, some of the greatest therapy I've ever had in my entire life. But yeah, it's like now I forget where I was going with the whole situation, but it's all, it's all good. So before we let you go, anything maybe I missed or anything you would like to, let the audience know that I may have not asked or something?
I don't think so. I think we covered it. Thank you for the opportunity to share Theo's story and to hopefully help raise some awareness for the importance of organ donation. And I love hearing your story too. It's just, I think as a parent, you know, the young kids, they can't verbalize what they're going through. And so, especially how that was your normal, it's just, that's so cool for me to hear. It's sad, right? Because
Yeah.
it's Theo's normal. But also it's a blessing in a way because it's not like he's miserable all the time. He's just, I go to the hospital, you
Yeah.
know?
And I've told this story
It's
to a
cool to
lot of,
hear.
I've told this story to a lot of mothers, and now I'm feeling really good about it, because every, parent that I talk to and say, it was my normal, and it hits the head, the head to go, wow, I guess he's right. It wasn't like, oh, I'm in the hospital. Oh, I can't do that. It's like, no, I do everything I've always done. There's nothing different about me. Now, I did have a story where a young lady had a lung transplant and was sick for many years. And so she was living her normal life from birth, but then got the transplant. But then, unfortunately, rejection set in and she needed a second. Now she's doing good again, but, and then I told the mother too, I said, well, now at that point, she had lived the good life of having all the energy and everything else. And so then it was taken away from her, because I know I've talked to people that are like athletes. I've talked to a woman who was a cricket, or I don't know what, but a coach, and she played all of her life in high school. She did track and everything else. And she said when it hit her, it just like, it scrambled her brain so much, because like, oh my God, my normal is gone. But for these kids, yeah, for any parent that's listening, most of them, they're living their normal life, and that you can be thankful for. At least, it's a sad way to put it, but you can be thankful for that he was leading his normal life up until his transplant. Now he's got a whole new world. Now it's like, now what do I do with this? I remember they told my wife after my transplant, because, I wore, reader glasses and things like that. And they go, well, you won't need to come to the hospital till probably like afternoon. He'll be out. And I think it was because even though I had the surgery, I still had a kind of a bad heart all my life. I was up like at 6 o'clock in the morning. I know by 7:30 or 8 o'clock, because I was doing morning radio at that time, I called my morning radio show partner, and he had me on the air with him at 8 o'clock. And I'm telling people, oh my God, I have my transplant. I feel great. This is wonderful. Of course, I was on prednisone too, which helped that feeling. But I was just like, and it was a fun day for me. I'll tell you that.
That's incredible.
And like all you
Too cool.
parents, my parents were told, like I said, I should live to about my mid-teens, and that's all they could do. And of course, they had that surgery. Then I had a transplant later. I had bypass. It seems like at every point where I'm about ready to check out, they have something new and exciting. So I want all parents to think about that, who knows what medical science will do tomorrow and where this is all going to lead. So hopefully Theo one day at 70 will be going, yeah, I had a heart transplant at 7, but I'm 70 now, and man, I'm doing all right.
I would love that. Nothing more. I would love nothing more than that. Yep.
Well, I thank you so much for being a part of the podcast, and I wish you and Theo the very best and your entire family. And if you ever need to talk to someone, my phone line's always open to you.
Thank you so much. This has been really nice. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Kristin, for sharing Theo's story with us today on Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. Be sure to join us each week for a new heartfelt episode. And if you have a transplant story, email us, giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, and don't forget to like and share this episode with family and friends. We would also appreciate your 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Another podcast you might enjoy is myself and my old radio partner, Bill Stevens. BJ and Bill, the podcast, on the Podcast Playground Network. We want to thank them for making this podcast possible. Until next time, I'm BJ Odom. Thank you for being part of our journey and reminding us all to appreciate each and every day and to treasure the extraordinary gift of life.
He was running on empty, heart fading fast. Doctor said, man, you ain't gonna last. But a stranger's kindness, a gift so true, turned the night sky into something new. He got a second chance, he got a brand new spark. Like a freight train rolling back from the dark. Gift of life, let the story be told. another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. 15 years later, the road got rough. The fight ain't over when the climb is tough. Needed a kidney, the race was on. Another hero stepped up, kept him strong. Every breath he takes is a tale of hope. One life saved, another can cope. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. Doctor's hands, a donor's grace, running on down to a brand new place. Second chances don't come twice, but when they do, man, they feel so nice. So let's spread the word, let the people know. One yesterday lets a miracle grow. You don't need wings just to save a man, just a little love, a helping hand. Gift of life, let the story be told. One heart beats, another takes hold. Give a little, save a soul. Ain't no greater rock and roll. BJ still rocking, still standing tall, thanks to the ones who gave it all. Gift of life, hear the sound. Pass it on, pass it down. The Gift of Life podcast, hosted by BJ Odom. Listen now. Listen now.